Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
Prospect Theory, an analysis of decision under risk, published in 1979 by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, stands as a monumental challenge to the prevailing economic dogma of expected utility theory. This paper, appearing formally in Econometrica in 1979, presented a descriptive model of decision-making under conditions of risk, one that diverged sharply from the normative, or prescriptive, models that had dominated economic thought for decades. Its impact resonates far beyond economics, permeating fields such as psychology, finance, marketing, and even political science. The genesis of prospect theory lies in the observed discrepancies between how individuals actually make choices and how expected utility theory predicts they should behave. Expected utility theory, the cornerstone of rational choice theory, posits that individuals make decisions by weighing the potential utility, or satisfaction, derived from each possible outcome by its probability of occurrence. In essence, this framework assumes that individuals are rational actors seeking to maximize their expected utility, a seemingly logical and mathematically elegant proposition. However, Kahneman and Tversky observed that human behavior systematically violated the axioms of expected utility theory, producing predictable patterns of irrationality. These violations, rather than random errors, suggested a deeper underlying psychology. Prior to prospect theory, experimental work highlighted numerous anomalies that challenged expected utility. The Allais paradox, formulated by Maurice Allais in 1953, vividly demonstrated that individuals tend to deviate from expected utility when presented with choices involving high probabilities of large gains. The paradox illustrates a preference for certainty. Even when the expected value of a riskier option is higher, people generally prefer a smaller, sure gain to a larger, probable gain, even if the mathematical expected value of the larger gain is superior. This behavior contradicts the assumption of strict rationality underpinning expected utility. Kahneman and Tversky's breakthrough lay in providing a coherent and psychologically plausible alternative framework that accounted for these observed deviations. Prospect theory introduces several key concepts that distinguish it from expected utility theory. Perhaps the most crucial is the idea of framing effects. Prospect theory suggests that how a problem is presented or framed significantly influences the choices people make. This contradicts the assumption of invariance in expected utility theory, which asserts that preferences should stay constant regardless of how options are described. For example, consider a medical treatment described as having a 90% survival rate versus one described as having a 10% mortality rate. Even though the two descriptions convey equivalent information, people tend to perceive the treatment with the 90% survival rate as more favorable. Another core tenet of prospect theory is the value function. Unlike expected utility theory, which assumes that individuals evaluate outcomes based on their absolute level of wealth, prospect theory posits that people evaluate outcomes relative to a reference point, typically their current state. The value function is asymmetric and S-shaped, meaning that it is steeper for losses than for gains. This reflects the principle of loss aversion, the observed tendency for people to feel the pain of a loss more strongly than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Research suggests the pain of losing $100 frequently outweighs the pleasure of gaining $100. This asymmetry helps explain phenomena such as the endowment effect, where people place a higher value on something they own solely because they own it. The value function is concave for gains, implying risk aversion in the domain of gains, convex for losses, indicating risk-seeking behavior in the domain of The probability weighting function represents another departure from expected utility theory. Prospect theory recognizes that individuals do not perceive probabilities linearly. People tend to overweight small probabilities and underweight large probabilities. This distortion of probabilities can lead to risk-seeking behavior when facing low-probability gains, such as buying lottery tickets, and risk-averse behavior when facing low-probability losses, such as purchasing insurance. The weighting function captures the psychological reality that people are more sensitive to changes in probabilities at the extremes of the probability scale. Mathematically, prospect theory replaces the expected utility formulation. Instead of maximizing the sum of probabilities times utilities, individuals maximize the sum of decision weights derived from the probability weighting function, multiplied by the value of outcomes derived from the value function. This mathematical framework incorporates the psychological insights of framing effects, loss aversion, and nonlinear probability weighting. Formally, the value v of a prospect is given by phi equals the summation from I equals 1 to n of pi of p sub I, multiplied by value of x sub, where p sub I represents the probability of outcome x sub I. Value of x sub I is the value assigned to outcome x sub I as defined by the value function, and pi of p sub I represents the decision weight associated with probability p sub I, as determined by the probability weighting function. The immediate impact of prospect theory on economics and finance was profound. Its ability to explain phenomena such as the equity premium puzzle, the disposition effect, and various other market anomalies gave it considerable explanatory power. The equity premium puzzle refers to the historically observed high returns on stocks compared to bonds, a phenomenon difficult to reconcile with expected utility theory. The disposition effect describes the tendency for investors to sell winning stocks too early and hold on to losing stocks too long. Prospect theory, with its concepts of loss aversion and reference dependence, provides a compelling psychological explanation for these behaviors. It offered a more realistic model of investor behavior than did the rational actor models that dominated finance at the time. Furthermore, prospect theory had a significant influence on the emerging field of behavioral economics by demonstrating the systematic deviations from rationality in decision-making. Kahneman and Tversky paved the way for a more psychologically informed approach to economics. The work legitimized the use of experimental methods and psychological insights to understand economic behavior. Moreover, it demonstrated that economic models need to account for the cognitive biases and emotional factors that influence human choices. The implications of prospect theory extend far beyond economics and finance. Marketing professionals quickly recognized the power of framing effects and loss aversion in influencing consumer behavior. For example, highlighting what customers might lose if they do not purchase a product can be more effective than emphasizing what they might gain. In political science, prospect theory has been used to understand voter behavior, risk attitudes in foreign policy decision-making, and the framing of political messages. The theory's insights into how people perceive risk and uncertainty have proven valuable in various domains. Over time, prospect theory has undergone revisions and extensions. Cumulative prospect theory, developed by Tversky and Kahneman in 1992, addressed certain limitations of the original theory, particularly in dealing with compound lotteries. Cumulative prospect theory incorporates a more sophisticated probability weighting function that accounts for the cumulative impact of probabilities. It provides a more accurate description of how people evaluate complex choices involving multiple stages of uncertainty. Despite its widespread acceptance and influence, prospect theory has faced critiques. Some argue that the parameters of the value function and the probability weighting function are difficult to estimate precisely. Critics also point out that prospect theory, while descriptive, does not always provide a clear explanation for why certain framing effects occur. Furthermore, the theory presumes an intuitive understanding of the probabilities involved, perhaps overlooking cases where people lack a deep understanding of the probabilities. The very notion of a reference point is itself open to multiple interpretations and potential manipulation. Determining exactly what constitutes an individual's reference point in any given situation can be subjective and context-dependent. This ambiguity raises questions about the predictability and falsifiability of prospect theory. Some researchers have explored the neural mechanisms underlying prospect theory, seeking to identify the brain regions associated with loss aversion, probability weighting, and other key concepts. These neuroeconomic studies provide further support for the psychological reality of the processes described by prospect theory. One particularly insightful critique centers on the question of ecological validity. The experiments supporting prospect theory often involve artificial scenarios and hypothetical choices. Some argue that behavior in real-world settings, with higher stakes and more complex information, may differ significantly from behavior in the laboratory. The extent to which prospect theory accurately predicts behavior in high-stakes, real-world situations remains the subject of ongoing research. The original formulation of prospect theory also assumed a degree of cognitive processing and awareness that may not always be present in real-time decision-making. Critics suggest that many decisions are made automatically, based on heuristics and emotions, without the conscious deliberation implied by prospect theory. Dual-process models of cognition, which distinguish between intuitive System 1 thinking and deliberative System 2 thinking, offer a complementary perspective on decision-making. System 1 thinking is fast, automatic, and emotional, while System 2 thinking is slow, deliberate, and rational. Prospect theory may primarily describe the operation of System 2 thinking, while neglecting the influence of System 1 processes. Despite these critiques, prospect theory continues to be a highly influential and valuable framework for understanding decision-making under risk. Its enduring legacy lies in its ability to capture the psychological complexities that traditional economic models often overlook. The theory's emphasis on framing effects, loss aversion, and nonlinear probability weighting has profoundly shaped our understanding of human behavior in various fields. Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for his work on prospect theory, highlighting its significant contribution to the field. Amos Tversky, who passed away in 1996, was acknowledged as having made an equally important contribution. The Nobel Committee explicitly stated that the award would have been shared had Tversky been alive. The 1979 paper, Prospect Theory and Analysis of Decision Under Risk, reshaped the landscape of decision theory. It laid foundations for behavioral economics, provided novel insights into financial markets, and broadened understanding of human behavior. Its legacy continues to inspire research across diverse disciplines, ensuring its place as a seminal work in the social sciences. The paper's impact reaches beyond simple economic models, touching upon the very core of human psychology and illuminating the biases that subtly, yet powerfully, shape our choices.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.